I'm going to talk about what I think is the high point of Catholic social teaching, and unlike the on economics, unlike the sort of IEA line, I don't think that's rerum novarum. I think it's actually the section in Caritas in Veritate by Pope Benedict, where he talks about three levels of economic activity, or three sort of hierarchy. And I think that these three ideas should help us shape the Catholic approach to economics. I'm afraid, since I spent all my time in the practical world, I'm going to be very theoretical because I don't get enough of a chance to do that. But I will assure you that this highly theoretical thinking actually has very strong practical implications. And I think I spend most of my time worrying about why the financial system has gone wrong. And I think the answer to that has to do with a misunderstanding of the basic nature of the economic process. The economy should serve the human good, the human community, and finance should serve the economy. And unless we think carefully about what we mean by the human good, the common good, we're not going to understand economics. Unless we think carefully about serving, we're not going to understand either finance or economics and their role and how they should be integrated. So this is actually, I think, the prolegomena to any real, not to any helpful policy discussions, but I think it is in itself a helpful prolegomena to what should be a good conversation about what we're trying to do. My view of economics is very broad. I think it is indeed an exchange of gift. We give to the world in our labor. We take back from the world what has been transformed by our labor, and indeed we take back, receive the labor that the world has given. And that's the basic economic interchange. A gift of labor that we offer, a receipt of things that we consume, a receipt also of the services of labor. And I think if one keeps that in mind, then you add to that the social questions of how we distribute this, how we organize our labor, how we make sure that what we receive is just, what we give is just, and then think a bit about the resources of the earth, the environmental questions. I think that is the way to look at economics. So if you look at it that way, it's not, as it were, ideological. And I think Catholic social teaching tries really hard, has tried all of the official documents to dodge the various ideologies. It's mentioned before that rerum novarum was a strong effort to counter the ideology then of socialism and communism. And I think there's an ideology of capitalism, and dare I say it in these halls, an ideology of free markets that the Catholic social teaching has worked hard to dodge, as it were, to find a way that is true to the Catholic teaching, true to a vision of the world, true to what John Paul II came to think of as this idea of gift, as central to the Christian understanding of human nature, God's gift to ourselves, to mankind as his Son, to speak in truly theological terms, is the mirror from which we should see all of our human nature. Jesus' gift, we see ourselves, in John Paul II's favorite quote, we see ourselves only in the reflection of Jesus in our full humanity. And the economy should be not separate from that. So Catholic social teaching is not pro-labor, it's not pro-employer, it's not pro-market, it's not pro-state, it's not pro-bureaucracy, it's not pro-hierarchy, it's not pro-not-for-profit. It's trying to get all of those things. It is pro-poor, one should say, but not in an ideological sense, which is why Francis says such bizarre things, because it's rhetorical and it's hard to know what he's talking about, because he's not trying to give us statistical analysis. He's trying to give us a Christian idea. And he's trying to stay away from any kind of dogmatic, and I think all the popes have tried, any kind of dogmatic statement of this economic ideology is where we are. It tries to be flexible. And just to get to this idea of Benedict's three levels, which, as I say, I think is really the high point, that there is he starts with the logic of exchange, that we give, as I said, to the world, and we give our skills, money, products, what we have, and then we have an idea of a fair return, that the principle of justice that is inbuilt in human nature suggests that we should have a fair return. This is not the market of conventional economics. The market of conventional economics is perhaps what you might call a reduced form of this, because there's a kind of motivation of self-interest there. So this is a much nobler, I would argue, I think Philip will disagree with me on this, a much nobler vision of exchange, of just exchange, fair price, fair wages, than comes out of a kind of pure market thinking. And then, but the Pope says the next step up, and he's quite clear that this is a higher idea, is the logic of public obligation, as he calls it. Not a euphonious phrase. Logic of public obligation is the idea that in its reduced form is the welfare state, or the tax and spend. I owe to the community something because I am nurtured by the community, protected by the community, a member of the community, love my community, and so I owe them something. But because we're not in an unfallen world, we live in a fallen world, I'm unlikely to just offer that without some compulsion. The compulsion can be social expectations, my friends, my community, my parents tell me what to do, or it can be the government itself demanding taxes from me, or it can be something in between. So I have a sense of public duty. I certainly have it at work. If someone calls me up and says I need to do something, even if I'm not going to be paid for it, there's no direct exchange, my community needs it, I'm happy to do it. I might be a little grudging, I might sometime ask for a pay raise, but that's a problem. Now, and then the third level that was mentioned is this quota of gratuitousness and communion. This sense that I do it without any thought of reward, the generosity that is, that one can see, for example, in voluntary work, in labors of love, in the forgiveness of debts, just because you think that it's fair to forgive this person who's in trouble. But you can also see it in the striving for professional excellence, or even in the entrepreneurial urge of people saying, I want to make something good for the world. They may think they want to make some money for themselves, but if you look at great entrepreneurs, great people who try to, researchers, their basic thing is they just want to give. And says the Pope, says the ex-Pope, the Pope Emeritus, that is actually the highest level of economic activity. And I think if we could integrate these ideas, we would look at the world differently. And what I think we would see, and again, this isn't exactly what Francis says, but I think he's onto this in a way. I think I'm not too far from his thinking. I think like the Pope, there you go, is that in rich countries, we have basically got where we're supposed to get with the economy. It does what it's supposed to do. It feeds the hungry, clothes the naked, provides so many resources that we have problems with excess and abundance far more than we have problems with poverty. Whisper that to the English bishops. We don't really have a poverty problem in this country. Left-wing thinkers always want to find one because they're used to the idea of poverty. They're still thinking in rerum novarum terms when there was an urban proletariat. Our economic problems are, as we say these days, first world problems. I don't have meaningful employment. I'm not quite sure what to do with all my excess. Which kind of expensive health care is too extravagant? These are, great. Glad to have those problems. But the economic problem in the world today is the billion people who are still really, really poor, for whom the basic goods of consumption, the basic accomplishments of the industrial economy are not present. And I think the Pope is trying to make that point. And I think he gets a little carried away in blaming the rich, that it's our fault that they are poor. But on the other hand, it's not as if, well, we can argue that. So that's a good question. What I do think one should worry about, and I think Pope Francis is a lot less worried than Pope Benedict was, and I think I wish for more of the Benedict thing, is what I refer to as the Hegelian state. Just heard about Locke. The great thinker, we talk Locke, we act Hegel in this world. That is to say, we talk about freedom and liberty and individual rights and private property, and we have an ever more dominant state that takes over our lives. And that's what Hegel thought was the direction of history, and he said, 2 thumbs up, the overwhelming state. And it was a state that has become increasingly, as Hegel said it would, anti-religious. He thought Catholicism was a rival form, a primitive form of the dominating state that he wished to see coming in history, he being a German Protestant. And I think the Catholic Church and its social teaching and its economic teaching has to wrestle with the question of the welfare state, which has become increasingly anti-family, anti-Catholic values. Whether the concepts of private property, yes, I've got a 1-minute warning here. I'm the first person to go over, so it's really bad. Whether these private property markets are helpful for dealing with these ideas, I'm somewhat doubtful. I like to talk about institutions, virtue, the rule of law, community, the Pope's horrible world, gratuitousness is a good word, obligation, those are good words. And I think that's the direction that Francis would like to take the church in. I hope that's the direction he is, because then if not, then I'm not thinking like the Pope, and I always want to think like the Pope. Thanks very much.